and I really appreciate that intro. And just as Janice mentioned, I've had the pleasure of being able to lead platforms at very large organizations as well as high growth organizations, and most recently as SVP of platform at Expedia Group, and prior to that at Workday and Dropbox. I'm super thrilled to be here because platform product is what I live and breathe, and I'm assuming a lot of the attendees today, as well as those who will be reflecting back on this, would be platform PMs or platform engineering teams. And as Denise pointed out, I hope to talk about how to develop and execute on a platform product strategy. Now, obviously, I'm not going to be able to cover the whole array of things. It's a very wide topic, but which is why we would reserve some time in the Q&A to actually go ahead and tackle any specific questions that you might have. So brief look at the agenda itself. I'll go over a little bit around why are we talking about platforms, if you should be building a platform, and what types of platform are we talking about here, and where exactly you are in your journey, and how do you actually go ahead and execute through this platformization, and what are some pitfalls you should be watching out for. Like I said, if there's anything else that you want me to cover today that isn't in the agenda, happy to address it during the Q&A session. All right, so let's start off with a little bit of context as to why we're talking about platforms today. Well, the early 1800s, of course, saw the Industrial Revolution with giants like the US Steel and Standard Oil. And of course, this was soon followed by the machine era with the advent of electric motors, gas turbines, and internal combustible engines. This is where you saw companies like GM and GE come up. And then fast forward, about 30 to 40 years ago, I know it seems too recent, but that was about 40 years ago, we saw the emergence of the digital era with software products and the internet that allowed proliferation of information. This is where we are today. What do we see now? In today's world, we see more and more industry giants providing not a single product on their own, but rather becoming giants by building platforms that enable and sustain an ecosystem, from marketplaces to ecosystems, super apps, and even metaverse. It all boils down to this question: should you build a platform? Well, first off, I'll put a disclaimer out there. I tend to use very cheesy graphics to help lighten what I think could be a very dreary topic. So just know that you've been forewarned. Now, I'm assuming most of you are at an organization that has a stable product that generates some revenue. You have a fairly good understanding of your market and the customer base that you're catering to. And your leadership team has now challenged you to ensure your organization's continued success into the future. And you keep hearing the buzzword platforms all around, and you want to understand if you should build a platform. I'm assuming a lot of you have been in this position. But what is a platform strategy? A platform strategy is an approach to entering a market which revolves around the task of allowing platform users to benefit from the presence of others. In traditional competitive strategy, it is generally assumed that the customers can determine their willingness to pay for the product or service independently. However, this assumption breaks down when you're working with platforms because platform users' participation is interdependent with the choices of other users. This is why formulation of a platform strategy requires distinct tools to help both platform entrepreneurs as well as managers tackle the challenges of value creation and value capture. As such, having a solid platform strategy is going to be more important than the platform itself. There are countless ways to flub this. Believe me, there are many companies that try this, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in later in the webinar too. But primarily, your platform strategy will try to answer two key questions. One, how will you attract customers? And two, how will you make your technology the core of an ecosystem? Now, before we jump there, let's first call out when it might not make sense to focus on building a platform. Imagine you are an early stage startup and you are yet to build your first product or figure out your market fit. In this case, it doesn't make sense to dive in and build a platform probably. You won't have the capital and resources to focus out on building a generic platform, and nor should you. Another classic reason is if you haven't yet figured out what your core capability is. You need something of value that you can sell first that will attract customers before you can build a platform for an ecosystem. Don't just be an Uber for something. I've seen this multiple times where people come and say, oh, we're going to be the Uber for doggy care, or we're going to be the Uber for delivering paintbrushes. Think about how your platform will make new connections. A classic example that I can think of is the company Axon, formerly used to be called as Taser. And that company used to build taser guns for law enforcement and personal protection. But its new focus is now on body cameras, including data storage and even collaboration tools. It makes it easier for that ecosystem of adjacent customers, like attorneys, to efficiently review and handle cases, and also reduce time for cops to write detailed reports. It's that kind of platform evolution we're talking about. Now, of course, we all know that building a platform is a long-term game. It takes time. So yet another reason could be that you simply have more pressing threats and not enough runway to build out a platform. Rather, you'd want to focus your resources and energy to ward off immediate threats to your existing products or market share. So again, this is not a laundry list of reasons, but just to get the ball rolling, like here are some scenarios where you probably shouldn't be focusing on putting together a platform strategy or building one out. Platform strategy is, in some sense, one of the most ambitious ways of entering a market you could have, because it requires coordinating the behaviors of multiple parties that might not know each other or that might not even want to know each other. You're sort of this orchestra conductor, if you will. And as a result of being very ambitious, it is a big deal. It can also fail very often. So remember that you're right to be platform curious, but you shouldn't necessarily be platform envious. That is to say, don't build a platform because you want to or you can, but because you actually have a well thought out strategy that will help you win. Great. So what does it mean when you say you've built a successful platform? Well, there are a number of dimensions to measure this, but broadly speaking, does it provide value to all parties interacting with the platform? Is it easy to onboard and extract value? If it is a direct-to-consumer business model, we want to ensure that there is almost no friction to adoption and value extraction. This is no less important in the B2B world, but the definition of what frictionless means could be relatively lax. And of course, does your platform have gravity? Does it have a healthy flywheel effect going on? This is where you're talking about, hey, it's bringing on more users, it's making the network size larger and thereby adding more value, and then more users, you get that going. So now let's jump into what it entails. Again, like I said, I might not be able to cover everything here, but I'm sure we'll be able to tackle more targeted questions in the Q&A. Broadly speaking, everybody understands the network effect. A platform brings together suppliers and consumers in an ecosystem. You need to have a core value or offering that you are clearly considered a leader in first. Identifying this core strength is an important first step before building a platform. Many times your product may start out serving only one party through this core value. But somewhere in your growth, though, you hit a tipping point when you have enough customers that you can bank on that customer base you created to extract additional value for other parties and create a network. It both creates and banks on the network effect to sustain, so to speak. And of course, this network effect also essentially acts like a self-fuel star. I mentioned the whole flywheel effect. Important to note, though, is this key point that the potential for network effect should already exist in the ecosystem. Building the platform alone simply doesn't create the network. That pain that you're trying to solve for needs to be a relevant pain that the ecosystem would be willing to come to your platform for. And so that's important. That's what gets it kicked off, that flywheel getting kicked off. Platform gravity. So customers on the platform derive more than just the core value, but rather additional value from the network it creates. We just talked about it. Inherently, though, what this does is it makes the platform stickier. However, what you want to avoid is creating a platform that imprisons the customer. You don't want them to feel stuck having to work with expensive service integrators or vendors or outdated APIs. Instead, you want to create an open platform that has gravitas. You want to make your customers come to your platform because they want to, not because that they have to. Remember, at the pace of innovation that we're seeing now is exponential, which means disruptors are going to be coming to, from all different angles. And so you want to be able to go ahead and guard your flanks by making sure your customers want to be on your platform and not necessarily because they have to be on your platform. Low cost, high value. The high ROI is sort of obvious when you're thinking about the platform strategy. But what you want to watch out for is not having to build a platform that focuses on fringe users. This could artificially inflate your cost benefit ratio. Very often, I will see this in many orgs. They confuse outlier requests from 1 or 2 customers as the need to platformize. You have to do a thorough analysis of your target audience and the potential business model economics before you choose to invest in platformizing. And again, ensuring that your platform can adhere to standards that are developed through some self-organization and self-governance becomes extremely important, because that is how trust gets built in, and that is going to be part of the core offering from your platform. Think about Uber. Uber is not simply an app that is going to allow you to go ahead and book a ride. There is some inherent trust built into it, because there are docking mechanisms to say like, hey, I can rate the driver can rate the passenger. Similarly, if you think about eBay, it's not just a platform where you're trading goods, but there is a trust built into it through some self-organization and self-governance, and that is also extremely important. And of course, note, you don't want to make it too rigid that it could dampen innovation. The structure and the governance should help you make sure that there is a good way to use the platform, but not necessarily dock too much that innovation doesn't happen. So maintaining this balance is going to be key for every product Jedi. Another reason why you want to have a platform strategy is because it allows you to grow exponentially. But note, this doesn't happen simply by building multiple solutions. Rather, you want to build a platform that grows interactions among parties on it. You want to enable transactions. Who knows, it might even open up a new revenue opportunity in the process. If you're currently servicing customers on a license-based model or a subscription-based model on a number of users, perhaps now this will allow you to go into a transactional revenue model or even a combination. This is something that I've been able to actually build products out in a completely different model at some of the organizations that I've been in, simply because we pulled together a strategy that allowed us to do so. Yet another reason is because a well-executed platform strategy creates a high barrier to entry and ensures continued dominance. There's a reason why, for most people, Uber and Lyft come first to mind when you think about rideshare products. It takes time to grow that trust, value, and loyalty, so good platforms can use this to their benefit. However, you also want to encourage a healthy cooperative ecosystem. While creating a barrier to entry is important, you want to allow for some dissonance in how your platform could be used. This is what allows you to recognize new markets and use cases. A classic example is Airbnb. They were able to recognize and offer additional services of experiences when they saw their platform being used in ways they didn't originally perceive themselves. And so making sure high barrier to entry exists, but also allowing for some level of dissonance is important. Creating a purpose-led brand. Now, this one's going to be a bit counterintuitive. Most companies pride themselves in creating a brand experience through a very rich user-centric approach. You want to control the end user experience in such a way so as not to lose your brand value. However, a platform takes you 180 degrees because you are almost giving up control of that end user experience to some extent. It is a little tough to unlearn, but not focusing on just your direct customer will actually grow your brand. Focus on the larger ecosystem and rise others along when you raise the tide. By building a platform that focuses beyond just their immediate customer, you become a purpose-led brand. This is what Google did when they built out the Android operating system platform, for instance. And so it's important to have that bigger picture in your mind. Great, this is all good. So you may be asking, but I'm responsible for building an internal platform, Archana, or I'm in charge of the success of our data platform. How does this all play? Well, the good news is it doesn't matter what type of platform you may be building. The guideposts and frameworks I've alluded to and we'll be talking about are applicable to all. I'm happy to dive deeper by platform, but it'll probably be a follow-up, if you will. But trust that when you think and ask these questions within the framework of the platform you're building, it will still help you come up with the right strategy. So, but before we get to all of that, I want us to understand where exactly in your platform journey you are. This is more from a strategic level and mostly what senior management and business drivers will be concerned with in your org. Okay, I'm about to get into a couple of heavy slides. I promise not to lose you, but if you have any questions, I'm definitely happy to answer it in the end as well. Now, think of the spectrum of SaaS platforms and apps that exist out there. I'm intentionally also talking about apps a bit here, simply because they're so closely related to the platforms. Three attributes are remarkably aligned across the spectrum and not coincidentally. One is specificity, from general purpose infrastructure to individual business specific logic. And of course, extensibility, from open platforms that cover every business in the cloud to custom apps and other apps don't typically build complementary businesses around. And of course, quantity, from highly consolidated cloud platforms with only a few dozen players to millions and millions of custom apps. In this stack, you can almost think of the application platforms, the app platforms, as the fulcrum. There is a massive convergence of platforms and a massive expansion and diversification of the apps. This is how you're going to be seeing most of the SaaS platforms and apps out there. And you need to be aware of this. Knowing where exactly you are is going to be key. Remember that everything above can be built on anything below. So when I'm talking about custom apps, it could even be custom apps that are built directly on the cloud infrastructure platform. Or it could be one that's built on the service platform, and a specialist app can be built on the cloud platform. It could be everything on the top layers, could be built on anything below it. So that's key to know. Now, note that the positions of this spectrum are not necessarily fixed. Cloud platforms, for instance, go up to offer more specialized services and capture value add. At the lowest layer, the general purpose infrastructure of cloud platforms is is often commoditized. You could see cloud and service platforms continue to rise into the app platform layer, for example, Amazon AppFlow. However, there also tends to be a domain chasm between the cloud service platforms and the app platforms that is challenging to cross in either direction. And the main divide in this chasm is simply because there is a difference in the audience that they both serve, developers versus the business users. And this difference affects everything, brand, to business model, to your pricing and packaging, to marketing and sales, education and enablement, and the very experience of the platform itself. So it's key to know that domain chasm definitely does exist. And so it's not always easy that everybody gets this. And then, of course, where we more regularly hear of cross-spectrum competition and consolidation is between the specialist apps and the app platforms. So relationships between app platforms and most of the specialist apps in their ecosystem are usually complementary and mutually beneficial. They have to be in order for an app platform to be successful. However, it is not uncommon to have some degree of co-opetition in a platform ecosystem. Successful specialist apps, especially in later stages of their growth, may extend or expand to become platforms themselves to increase their value. And in the other direction, app platforms tend to absorb some specialist app capabilities over time, either through acquisitions or simply evolving organically their own products to keep pace with the customer expectations. So know that this can also happen in both directions. And then, of course, the cross-spectrum shift that we see happening most frequently is the migration of custom apps, which are built for one company's own use, packaged as specialist apps that are then sold to others. And you tend to see this in two main flavors. There is the new digital business, so as part of a digital transformation or simply just because of being born digitally, a new company. You may find that the software that you have developed could be valuable to either your existing customers or more often to serve an adjacent set of new customers. And so you package your software and start selling it usually within its own current business unit. The second type or the second flavor that you tend to see is the services and the software businesses. So typically a professional services company seeks to bottle their secret sauce, if you will, into a software. Or if they develop custom apps for clients, they might identify a repeatable pattern across multiple clients. And so they decide to go ahead and launch an app as a product from their expertise and experience, and then possibly as a standalone profit center, but often as a client acquisition or a retention strategy, or simply a way to deliver their services with greater efficiency and value add differentiation. So you tend to see that also happen. Generally speaking, though, turning a custom app into a specialized app is not easy. It's a very different business model, often with very different operational dynamics than the original business that it was created for. And so this is why it's labeled the commercialization chasm. And it shouldn't be traversed lightly. Even if only a small fraction attempt commercialization, and the probabilities of success are very, very low. The absolute number of specialist apps being launched through this process, though, are very large. I expect that these leaps from the custom apps to the packaged specialist apps will only continue to increase in magnitude. A lot of large companies, you'll tend to see this, and that commercialization chasm is what they're trying to close. But it's not very easy to do. And so just being aware of why it exists is also going to be very, very important. Okay, now we will switch gears a bit and get into the day-to-day operations of things that you need to be aware of and of doing when you're actually going through the platformization. I'll try to run through the next few slides fairly fast because I think most of these are pretty self-explanatory. If you've been a PM for a while, it's no different from how you would or what you would need to take care of when you're building any product, let alone a platform product. So filtering down scope and intent is extremely important before you build anything. It includes the platform too. And so many organizations follow different methods, but suffice to say, clearly defining your objectives is sacrosanct. PR FAQs are a great way to anchor your team's understanding of the vision for your platform. Having an upfront vision of what your platform launch is going to look like will help anchor your team. You will also need a prioritization framework that can help you organize your overall intent. While a platform can really do multiple things, knowing what is important and table stakes is important in helping you prioritize your work. Otherwise, you'll be running squirrel. And of course, you also know that everything is fluff and talk unless you can measure impact in a quantifiable manner. So make sure you define and set the results that you are actually going to be measuring and that you can actually measure. Two very different statements. Knowing what you can and what you must are both key. Goes without saying, don't try to boil the ocean. You keep hearing MVP, but what is it really? The diagram tries to explain it. Don't try to do all functions at one time. Try to piecemeal it. So make sure to test it out and test it often and take the feedback and truly take it in. Oftentimes you will see teams rush through without actually understanding what it is that the experimentation or the tests are telling them. And remember, though, that this needs to match the themes and the OKRs you are setting for your roadmap. That is also equally important to make sure that you are tracking progress. Now, I'm an engineer in my past life, so please take what I say with a grain of salt. Engineers love to work on cool stuff and iterate over and tweak things constantly because, well, it's interesting. In actuality, what you don't want to do is fly blind. So have a clear understanding of what success should look like for your platform and define metrics that will help you determine that. And make sure to set, measure, and monitor those said metrics. This will help you both realize when you've arrived at success and also help you have guardrails to not regress in the process of getting there. I've seen many teams lose track of this because their internal developer platforms, for instance, don't necessarily have the guardrails. And so while every service, microservice is calling the next, all are performing and saying green in terms of the timeline. Overall, they've regressed quite a bit because no one's holding the checkpoints there. So having visibility into metrics has also helped me identify new use cases based on usage patterns and build out a whole new solution offering. So remember to monitor and understand with a bias towards action. All of that are key. Of course, you should plan for updates. Changes can come in many forms, so plan for changes in the market, competitive landscape, partners, customers, you name it, it can change. So looking ahead and planning for these shifts will drastically help your own ability to execute on your platform strategy. But like I mentioned before, allow for some level of dissonance so that you can identify market changes and needs ahead of time. Opening up the platform for your co-opetitors to integrate with will also give you insights into your competitive landscape and where they are headed. This has also been very key in understanding what are going to be your crown jewels for your platform, and meaning you need to hold that close to your heart, not give it away. And then where are areas that you can actually go ahead and be a little bit more lenient in what capabilities you make available to the broader ecosystem. Communicating early and often with your partners can help you discern any potential updates on their offerings that could either cripple or boost your platform. So knowing this ahead of time will help you bolster your platform. Same goes for keeping a constant pulse on your customers. Seasonality, changing demographics, new services are all factors that can help mold your platform strategy. A classic example for this is when Apple came up and they came out with their multiple surfaces of the iOS and then the iPad OS and, all of those new operating systems. When I was at Dropbox, we needed to make sure and have a constant pulse on how they're performing in the market so that we could actually plan and figure out where we needed to invest on our own platform. Should I focus more on concentrating for the Windows users or the Mac users, and where does it make sense for me to prioritize depending on how that market is trending? So making sure all of that is constantly updated and captured in your plan is going to be key. Remember, it is all about the audience. Engagement, you think it could only apply to feature products, but think again. Your platform deserves no less limelight. You need a go-to-market strategy for your platform that you can clearly communicate to all stakeholders and evangelize like your life depended on it. Remember that platforms don't spend on TV ads. Actually, I take it back. I was recently streaming ESPN Sports and I saw an ad for Splunk and their platform. Then again, such is the power of targeted advertising. I digress. You are counting on proliferation and adoption by communicating to all your stakeholders and communicating often. You can share roadmaps even to help create dependability on your platform. There is this one platform company that actually puts out their 1-year roadmap on their website. I kid you not. Because one, it holds themselves accountable for what they're delivering, but at the same time, for anyone who's dependent on their platform, it gives them insights into what's coming down the pipeline, and it's actually published on their website. So it's a great way to make sure that all your stakeholders are informed. In the end, it is people who are making decisions to adopt your platform. So make sure you're creating a healthy community by actively contributing to discussions and making your platform users feel like their needs and wants are being heard. This is extremely important when you're looking at the developer experience, both the internal developers as well as third-party developers. So making sure that you have a very healthy developer relation and a developer community and how you keep them engaged is going to be very, very important. Not everyone gets to build a platform from scratch. So often building a platform could feel like you're replacing your plain engine mid-flight. You want to continue supporting and catering to your current customers while also building and replacing internal services with a new platform. So make sure that while feature teams might sometimes pick up the work, the platform principles are adhered to, meaning I am just putting together this flashy, shiny front-end feature for something, for a particular product, for a particular customer need, which is all great, but build it in such a way that you don't have to go revisit it. Make sure you're adhering to platform first principles. Ensure attention to APIs is given so that you don't just build for parity. That would be akin to your platform catering to a single solution and not really being a platform, because what you don't want to do is do the same thing that your feature product does anyway and only give that as your platform offering. Doesn't really solve much. So making sure also that given that most organizations often have to trade off scope with available time and resources, it is very easy to fall into the trap of building APIs that simply cater to MVP and then get abandoned. This is something that many organizations struggle with, and this is where it is extremely important to understand that the platform building takes a long time. It's a long-term play, and finishing the thought is extremely important, and abandonment after MVP is not going to lead you to a successful platform. Generalize the interface. This goes without saying. You don't want to build for a solution, but rather build general enough for innovation to happen on your platform. have some constraints, but allow for interactions to grow, and really dumb it down, like dumb down your interfaces. Complexity should be handled behind the covers. One of the platform tenets is the rule of one. Have only one team to talk to and depend on. This is extremely important. And when you adhere to this platform tenet, the rule of one, you will see that you can achieve a lot more with a much leaner org. And so it's important that you follow that. And it also makes it a lot more easier in terms of the architecture itself, because it'll automatically simplify it quite a bit. And of course, don't forget to document. This is key. A bit more on this later for sure. Like any product, your platform also has a life cycle. So need to have a proper and well-defined support strategy. So API versioning or deprecation is harder than product features. You are looking at hundreds or thousands of integrations that have been built on top of those APIs. So backwards compatibility is important. Also, you need to ensure the cost of maintenance is going to look like for unsupported operating systems, platforms, versions, or surfaces. At Dropbox, for instance, we had a dedicated team working on versioning strategy to help reduce cost of maintenance. So remember that this is important, and many people think of this or not think of it at all. Making sure that you have a good plan for communicating your versioning, end of support, and end of life strategy for your platform is also important. It cannot be an afterthought. Most teams fail at retiring deprecated APIs. You don't want to do that. You should stick to the process and make sure that you are also deprecating and retiring APIs on a regular basis. So make sure you treat your APIs like you would any well-defined product. I won't go too much into this. Again, all of this is it depends. Many teams ask this, is this a golden rule that you have to do it? I would look at it more from the point of making sure that as long as you have many levels of abstraction, it makes it easier, because then the more pliable and reusable components of your platform that you can use. And it'll also make it easier to maintain, but don't do it just because you have to do it. Only do it when it makes sense. There are plenty of services that don't need to be touched within your org or within your stack, just because how it's going to be used, where it gets used, doesn't really make a big dent. And so you don't want to unnecessarily increase your cost of development or affect your time to market. This is more important though, being aware of the storyline. I know I feel like I'm saying that for every slide, but this is really where the rubber meets the ground. You don't want to lose sight of the big picture. Having only partial capability on your platform doesn't really help. So adoption and usability will suffer, as it can't provide a good end-to-end seamless experience for your customers. So make sure you have some basic end-to-end use cases defined as you work on building your platform, and force yourself to create some reference implementations for these use cases to validate the usability of your platform. Oftentimes, this is what gets missed because teams are so focused on launching a particular API and saying, we have X number of APIs out there, and then it's crickets because nothing gets used. Because one, a reference implementation has not been pulled together. And two, the whole thing is not fully baked. Like, you cannot have a valid use case be solved with the APIs that have been released. I cannot tell you how many times I have worked with architects who have abandoned products or platforms due to lack of documentation. When you're going through building products or building platforms, you're often going to be also evaluating other products and other platforms out there. And more so because you can get a head start, acquisition, merger, and all of that stuff. But when you don't have good documentation, that's where everything falls flat. So it doesn't matter whether you're building a platform for internal adoption or external adoption, make sure the documentation cannot be an afterthought. And again, reference implementations and all of that. this is one that is going to be key because one, it sets up your user base for success, but it also allows them to experiment with what you're putting out there. One of the important pitfalls to watch for is the feeling that you need to build everything. This is a lot fun when you're working with strong engineering teams as well. Curb this urge and only spend time playing to your core strengths. Constant build by partner evaluations are going to be key. On the flip side, when you do decide to integrate with a partner, ensure you're not opening up yourself to be replaced. Pick partners that can add to the overall value without diluting or replacing what you're bringing to the table. And this is where knowing what your core strength or core capability and what your crown jewels are is going to be extremely key when you're pulling together a platform strategy. Oftentimes, people confuse their existing end product use cases within their product portfolio as their core strengths. And I challenge back teams constantly because no, that is a use case for a particular stack of customers, vertical customers, that your platform capabilities are and should be solving for, but that's not the only one. Constantly looking back to see what are really your core capabilities or your crown jewels that you need to hold. This is extremely important because that is what will help you determine effectively where you want to partner and where you want to build. Hopefully, this will help you formulate the why, what, and how of your platform product strategy. Obviously, these are more akin to guideposts to consider as you frame your platform strategy, and it's neither comprehensive nor set in stone. And of course, your own strategy may differ based on whether you're a Series A company, a pre-IPO, an early growth, or a behemoth like Google. Questions? Again, I'm a big fan of the Pinky and the Brain. For those of you who are not Animaniacs fans, every night, Pinky asks Brain what we're going to do, and Brain says the same thing that we do every day, which is take over the world. Back to you, Denise, for any questions.
I love it. I love it. Oh, it's really going to be back to you. But so I'd love to start with the beginning. And apologies, my connection might be a little unstable. You got to love working remotely. But in your experience, would love to hear like how you or maybe companies who have brought you in to lead the platform strategy really identified, hey, we have a need here. Like what were those market trends or customer insights that were really those aha moments that told them there's an opportunity?
Different organizations have had different ways that they've sort of arrived at this point where they've scratched their head and gone like, what should we do? Some have gone through, for instance, inorganic growth, meaning they had acquired lots of brands, lots of tech stacks. And so now you're forced to figure out, hey, instead of trying to do the same thing 10 different ways, how can we actually go ahead and converge the stack, if you will? So the convergence has been one of the primary objectives of the platform, like I mentioned in one of the slides that talks about where the convergence happens and where the proliferation happens. When you're converging, the question then also becomes, great, now that you have a single efficient tech stack that can do a lot of the core functionalities in a particular flow, are there opportunities for us to then also go ahead and make that available to a broader ecosystem in an a la carte fashion? Which means, hey, sure, I have figured out how to go from A to Z, but not everybody wants to follow the same A to Z pattern. They just want to figure out a portion of your flow that they want to plug into their own customized whatever. Think of the kanji characters. You got a lot more than 26. And in those instances, building out a platform capability in a manner that allows for you to then provide those services as standalone offerings is also going to be key. So that's been one class. And you also arrive at the same problem statement, even if you're growing organically very fast, in which case you often end up having these siloed teams which create snowflakey versions of the same service multiple times over. And then you're faced with the same challenge. But oftentimes when you're trying to take this to market, what they don't recognize is your ability to scale and own a larger market share comes when you play the platform play. I'll go back to an example of a company that I worked for. We built SaaS products for the mortgage industry. And originally, we were focused more on the originations of mortgages. So we had a SaaS product that allowed banks and brokers to go ahead and create loans, which was great. But what we quickly realized is it's a very large market, extremely fragmented, and we only had a very small sliver of the market share. What we then did was focused on building out the platform. So the entire data that gets captured in the loan creation process was what was the core crown jewel, if you will. And we allowed for integrations on top with a point of sale system, an origination system, a CRM system, a selling system, multiple things that then makes us have a lot more players than just the brokers or the loan officers who originate loans. And so it's those kinds of things. Having a platform strategy and executing it really well will allow you to grow your market share at an exponential rate. But it also means that it deserves that level of hand-holding throughout. You need to think of all of the different angles when you're putting together a platform, because if you drop the ball anywhere, the trust factor drops immediately and you lose even your existing customers. So it is important, and those are the kinds of scenarios when typically companies pause and ask, hey, should we be thinking about it differently and build out a platform instead?
Yeah, love those real world examples. That's amazing to hear, like how you were able to rapidly, bring to market so many other things, and you're not having to build it all yourself, which is incredible.
Yes.
Another thing that you said during today's webinar was you talked about how the platform strategy requires it's a long-term play, right? You need a long runway to be successful. And so when I hear long-term, I think upfront buy-in. And so, how have you gone about really getting the company to align on the why and the specific objectives that you can achieve with the platform strategy? What tactics have worked?
There's two parts to this, and different companies, depending on their business model, can look at it very differently. So it's not going to be one answer that fits for everyone. You'll have to understand the company's current core business model to be able to answer that question. But I'll tell you the things that you'll have to think through. For instance, if given that this is a long-term play, when you would actually see revenue coming from the platform is going to take a much longer term. And so making sure that you're setting both the expectation and clearly defined success metrics along the way is going to be key. In the beginning, one of the things that I didn't get to talk about is when you're launching a new platform, getting customers, the first set of customers is going to be key. And you can go about it in multiple ways. You can either go ahead and do, have a marquee user that adopts your platform first and then, brings in others. Or you can go the low price or freebie version of your offering to see if you can get more customers or users onto your platform. And in both of those scenarios, you can seed the customers and then move forward. However, there are some pitfalls to watch out there too. Like if you don't set the customer expectation up front, it can bite you later, where they're only going to do it if it's free forever. That was one of the things we saw at Dropbox, which was, hey, free. I can sign up in just 3 clicks. I get 2 GB. Now we grew to 600 plus million users, but how do I get them to pay? How do I get them to stay, be sticky instead of creating new email addresses to sign up for more storage? Those things become very, very tricky. So for the management, you need to make sure you clearly define what success is. In early stages, it could simply be that you're trying to get more and more users on it, because that's one of the key ingredients for a successful platform. And then later on, at some point, you have enough users that they're now used to your services and you can charge. You can think about your Gmail account or Google Drive. Every one of us, almost a decade ago, or maybe even longer than that, we all signed up for this cool new mailing tool. It was all free. Fast forward 15 years later, Google said, now is the time for us to monetize on this. And then I'm going to charge them for storage. It's not for the email service, it's for storage, because they realized what their crown jewel is, which is data and access to the data and privacy to the data and all of that stuff. So it's a long-term play. So you might not necessarily see direct dollars coming from that platform today, but it inherently makes it more stickier, which means you have the opportunity to sell other products. Google, for instance, their revenue model, a big chunk was coming from the ads in their search platform, which allowed them to go ahead and invest in the other areas of the platform innovation. But not every company has that luxury. So you have to make sure that you understand your current business's business model in making the right argument for a platform play.
And I love that you mentioned metrics there. And I know we probably only have time for 1 or 2 more questions. And you talked about users as one of those key things, right? Like, how do I drive user growth, user adoption, especially early on? What are some of the other metrics you'd advise people to pay attention to as they're building out their platform strategy?
Developer experience is another big metric, and it's a broad term. And many people anchor on different things when it comes to developer experience, but all of those are relevant. Things like, how long does it take for a developer to set up and hook onto your platform and start using its service? If it is an end user, so this is more of the B2B model, which is somebody else is building more specific custom use cases on top of your platform services. So it's mostly APIs that you're exposing and the developers need to access it. So the developer experience, how easy is it for them to set up and go? How pre-built everything is for them, so they don't have to spend a lot of time setting up their environment. They don't have to spend a lot of time trying to read through your documentation to better understand. Like, that is going to be extremely key. The related to that developer experience is also time from call to time to push, meaning someone's signed a dotted line or clicked on a link to say, I want to buy your service as a developer. I'm getting access to your API. From that time to when they're able to productionize their product, that is a very key important metric. Depending on the business, depending on the area that you're going after, if that takes more than a week, it's a big red flag. Mm-hmm. I need third-party developers to push something out, fully tested in their production within a week's time. That is a good starting point for a platform. You tend to tighten it after that, but that's a good starting point. Ambitious starting point for many companies, but nonetheless, that's what people are used to these days. It's like 2 decades ago, the way internet was, for your email to load, it would take forever and we had the patience, but now nobody does. You want everything instant. So sub-microsecond performance is key. The other thing that I also talked about is the end-to-end user experience. So you should have a clearly well-defined few sets of end-to-end use cases that can be solved by your platform services. And you need to know that that experience also is performing at an optimal time frame and not drawn out. So those are all key metrics, I would say. Another one is in terms of the price itself. It's not just in terms of revenue coming in, but cost involved in being able to host and service the customer base that you have. There's dollar amounts tied to both, and tracking that is also a key metric that you need to be aware of.
I love that. So make it easier for developers, because more developers means more experiences, means more users. Make the user experience great, simple, fast, easy. And then don't forget about your margins.
Yes. There is a separate one that I use, but I think it differs from company to company. I also have an API count. It's like, how many did we push out and how many did we deprecate? Like, I need to see one line go up and then the other line come down. But if the other line is stagnant, then I know that there is a concern. But of course, it depends on the growth stage of the company too. When you're early on, you're just pushing more out, nothing gets deprecated. But later stage, you want to make sure that you're deprecating stuff too.
Yeah, I love that you highlight that too, because I think that's the thing that we often forget, or it gets pushed to the wayside because it's not the glorious work, but, to your developers, to your, for them, it's one more thing from a cognitive overhead perspective. Like, do I need to care about that API or not?
Yes. One of the things I will also say is, and platform strategy can wear multiple hats depending on the product and the space that you're in. For instance, when I was at Dropbox is really a hack of the kernel file system. We were able to do file sync and share much better than the OSs at that point. Just how we grew as a company. Great story. Fast forward a decade later, the behemoths, the Goliaths of the world, if you will, started to get smarter. So now you have Apple and Microsoft and Google restricting access to their file systems through their own APIs, which is great from a business perspective. However, that also means it dampens my pace of innovation. I cannot innovate faster until all three have released a functionality at some point. Otherwise, what I'm trying to build will only be available for one service, either Windows or Android or iOS. So, which means I need to be proactive in figuring out how we will address that. And things like that require your platform strategy thinking in a very different angle, because then you're looking at potentially doing co-authoring of files. So it's no longer the file system and the kernel that's going to be the source of truth. You can also have one, but that requires a lot more collaboration. So there's a lot of things at play. So like I said, this is just the surface that we're trying to skim in this 1 hour, but there's a lot more in detail that goes into depending on the product and the ecosystem and the marketplace that you're going after.
Well, I know we're at time. And so while this may only be the surface, I think it was an incredible surface to share with the community here today. And so needless to say, thank you for spending the time with us. And thank all of you for attending live and for viewing this later. I'm sure that there's a lot of really practical advice that you can put to work in your platform strategies tomorrow. So with that, thanks so much and have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you all.
All right. Bye.